most dangerous person is not always the loudest one. Sometimes it is the person who stayed silent for too long, the person who always understood, the person who always forgave, the person who always gave people another chance. Because kind people are different. They don't fight every battle. They don't react to every insult. They don't expose every betrayal. They stay quiet, not because they are weak, but because they still care. They still have a heart. They still believe people can change, but there is a limit. Even the kindest person has a breaking point, and when that point comes, something changes. The person who once begged for peace becomes someone who no longer needs anyone's approval. The person who always put others first finally chooses themselves. The person who was always available becomes unreachable, and people call it arrogance. They say, "So, you changed," but they never ask, "What did we do to make you change?" They only notice your reactions, never their actions. They remember the day you walked away, but they forget all the days you stayed. They remember your final silence, but they forget every time you screamed for respect without making a sound. Because the truth is, kind people don't become cold overnight. They become cold after being ignored too many times, after forgiving too many times, after being taken for granted too many times. A good heart can handle pain, but even a good heart gets tired. You can break a person who loves you. You can push someone who always stood beside you. You can keep testing someone's patience, but one day, the person who always said it's okay will stop saying anything, and that silence will be your answer. Because when a kind person is done, they don't usually seek revenge. They don't need to destroy you. They don't need to prove anything. They simply leave. And that is the part people don't understand. The person who once gave you their energy can learn to live without you. The person who once cared about your opinion can stop caring completely. The person who once fought for you can finally walk away. And when that happens, you lose something rare. Not someone who was perfect, but someone who was real. Someone who cared when they didn't have to. Someone who stayed when leaving was easier. So be careful with kind people, because their kindness is not weakness. Their patience is not unlimited. Their silence is not surrender. Sometimes the quietest person in the room has survived the loudest battles, and when they finally decide they are done, you will meet a version of them you never thought existed. Not because they became a bad person, but because they finally learned their own worth. You pushed too far. You ignored too much. You took too much. And now, the person who always cared has finally stopped. Because the hardest thing to understand is, a kind person rarely leaves because they stopped caring. They leave because they cared too much for too long. They carried conversations that were one-sided. They fixed problems they didn't create. They stayed loyal to people who were slowly destroying their peace. And every time they were hurt, they told themselves, maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe they will change. Maybe things will get better. But hope has a limit. Even the strongest heart gets tired of fighting a battle alone. And one day, the person who always tried to understand everyone finally understands themselves. They realize, I deserve the same kindness I give to others. That is the moment everything changes. They stop chasing. They stop explaining. They stop trying to prove they are worthy because they finally see the truth. The people who truly value you will never make you beg for basic respect. A kind person becoming dangerous does not mean they became cruel. It means they became aware. They learned that being good does not mean accepting everything. They learned that forgiveness does not mean allowing people to hurt them forever. They learned that having a big heart does not mean having no boundaries. And that is when people get confused. Because they were comfortable with the old version of you. The version that always said yes. The version that always stayed. The version that always forgave. But they were never prepared for the version of you that finally chose peace. They will say, you are different now, and they are right, because pain teaches lessons comfort never could. You don't become stronger because you wanted to. You become stronger because life gave you no other choice. The person who was once afraid of losing people becomes someone who is no longer afraid of walking away. The person who once needed everyone learns how to stand alone. And that is powerful, because someone who can survive alone cannot be controlled easily. They cannot be manipulated easily. They cannot be broken easily. They have already survived the moment that almost destroyed them. So remember this. Never mistake someone's kindness for weakness. The calmest people often have the strongest storms inside them. The quietest people often carry the deepest pain. And the people who forgive the most sometimes become the people who leave forever. Because when a kind person is truly done, they don't create a scene. They don't announce their departure. They simply disappear, and the silence they leave behind says everything. You pushed too far. You ignored the warnings. You tested their patience. And now, you have lost access to a person who would have done anything for you.